Parts of the excretory or urinary system include the kidneys, ureters, bladder, and urethra. Kidneys function to filter blood and remove the waste from the body. About 20% of blood goes from the heart directly to the kidneys. Ureters carry urine made in the kidneys to the bladder. The bladder is a sac lined with transitional epithelium used to store urine. The epithelial layer allows for the bladder to stretch. It holds it so urinating is infrequent and voluntary. The urethra carries the waste from the bladder out of the body. The outer layer of the kidney is the renal capsule. It is the hard protective coating that helps preserve shape. The next layer is the renal cortex, which contains most of the nephron. The layer inside that is the renal medulla. Urine starts to get collected from all the nephrons and leads to the ureter here. The next layer is the renal papilla, which channels urine made from the medulla to the renal pelvis. The renal pelvis surrounds each papilla and acts as a funnel into the ureter. The functional unit of the kidneys is the nephron. There are millions of them in each kidney. Most of the nephron is in the renal cortex, but it dips down into the medulla. The nephron is a bundle of capillaries and tubules that filter blood and remove the waste. The glomerulus is the bulb-like structure in the middle of the nephron. There is a tangle of capillaries in the middle where most of the filtering of blood plasma occurs. The outer cover, called the Bowman's capsule of the glomerulus, is part of the renal tube that carries the waste. There is then the proximal convoluted tube on the left, the nephron loop, which dips down into the medulla, and lastly, the distal convoluted tubule. The urine the nephron creates is then drained into the collecting duct to be removed from the body. Blood enters the nephron from the renal artery and splits off into a capillary. The capillary is called the afferent arteriole when it enters the glomerulus to be filtered. The blood leaves the glomerulus through the efferent arteriole. It then gets tangled in the renal tubule and continues its filtration. Then it goes down the nephron loop and drains into the renal vein. Urine formation starts in the glomerulus with glomerular filtration. This filters water and some small dissolved molecules and ions out of the plasma. It cannot filter larger molecules like proteins because of their size. The particles are filtered through many tiny holes in the capillaries called fenestrae, as seen in picture. The product of this first step in filtration is called glomerular filtrate. It consists of much more water and ions than the body can lose. There is much more glomerular filtrate than there is urine. This is because the rest of the urine-making process puts what the body needs back into the blood and only takes out the excess. The glomerular filtrate flows through the renal tubule, and the rest of the process occurs in the proximal and distal convoluted tubules and in the nephron loop. The last parts of urine formation are tubular reabsorption and tubular secretion. They occur as the capillary and renal tubule travel along. Tubular reabsorption is the process where substances are transported out of the tubular fluid through the renal tubule epithelium and back into the blood. The reabsorbed things include water, ions, and glucose. Tubular secretion goes from the capillary to the renal tubule by mostly active transport. Things that are secreted include hydrogen ions, potassium ions, penicillin, and histamine. Overall, in the glomerulus, water and dissolved substances are filtered from the blood plasma. The filtrate flows into the renal tubule. In the proximal convoluted tubule, reabsorption of many ions occur by active transport as well as water by osmosis. Also, active secretion of some substances. In the nephron loop, reabsorption of water by osmosis occurs on the way down, and reabsorption of sodium, chloride, and potassium ions on the way up. In the distal convoluted tubule, there is reabsorption of sodium and water and secretion of hydrogen and potassium ions, which affects the pH. At the end of the renal tubule, the final product of urine is made at last. Thank goodness.